What storylines around Nebraska football aren't getting enough attention this week? We'll tell you next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase.
All right, welcome in. Happy Wednesday. Connor Happer from 1620 The Zone and Omaha, Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Got wrapped up with another day of speaking to coordinators, a few players yesterday. There's a player that's going to come up in this segment as a forgotten about storyline. We'll discuss it in just a second. But one of the central stats that everybody's looking at this year is how Nebraska has not given up a rushing touchdown the entire year. They are the only team in the country who hasn't done that, and it's not just that. Their rush defense is only giving up 84 yards a game. That is seventh in the country. Their defense in totality has certainly bounced back from a couple wonky weeks against Northern Iowa and against Illinois. So Nebraska's defense, and specifically their rush defense, I think, Mitch, should be at the focal point of attention this week, and it's not getting much run.
I don't know that it is, and I think part of the reason is because Nebraska's not really buying into the conversation that its rush defense is great. Tony White, Nebraska's defensive coordinator, was asked about the key for the Huskers in allowing so few or zero rushing touchdowns this season, and he swatted it away. He's like, you could just tell he didn't want to go there. He doesn't want to give his players anything to read or hear about his singing of the praises about this rush defense. And I mean, clearly not allowing a rushing touchdown is somewhat a product of just the situations in games and who Nebraska has played. It doesn't mean that. Yeah, there's a little bit of right. There have been times where the Huskers have given up yards. There have been times where they haven't been great at the goal line. Think Illinois, and it just so happens nobody's run it in on them. Now, give them credit for the goal line stand against Rutgers, but this isn't yet like a transcendent rush defense. But I think, to go to our theme of this first segment, people aren't talking enough about this aspect of the Nebraska. The totality of who Nebraska is going into this game, because I think it matters a lot against Indiana if the Huskers can shut down the run.
Well, Indiana hasn't played a game yet where they haven't had both at their disposal, both the pass and the run at their disposal. So they've been able to crease some runs in the run game. They're awfully, boom or bust, I think, in the run game. I had a stat yesterday on my show, and I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head. I don't want to get it wrong, but basically in their last two games, half of the runs that they've tried have gone for 2 yards or less. Okay. And the other half, they get all their yards. So I feel like Nebraska, has been a pretty stout, defense up front, and basically you could expect that, through 18 games in the Matt Rule era. So I wonder what'll sort of be the point of emphasis for them in particular against Indiana, but they run it for Indiana runs it for 200 yards a game. I mean, 200 yards a game is a pretty big number. And I would think that Nebraska sees that, Tony White sees that, and they say, yeah, good luck getting half of that on Saturday. I think that's probably what they're thinking in their heads.
Nebraska, if it holds Indiana out of the end zone via the rush, will be the first team since Notre Dame in 2012 to go 7 games into a season and not allow a rushing touchdown.
Wow. Stat of the day. Nice job.
That's Keith Mann. I have nothing to do with that statistic. That's in Keith's Mann's game notes on page 4. So,
well, we get credit for using Keith's stats all the time. So thank you, Keith. But we'll pawn that off as our own here on the podcast. Thank you.
It's at that point you kind of have to start talking about it, right? And they're going to go to Ohio State next week, which may have the best pair of running backs in the country. And again, it's not going to matter at all how many touchdowns you've allowed on the ground. In fact, Nebraska might want to allow a touchdown on the ground this week against Indiana, and preferably for the Huskers, a winning effort. So Ohio State, coming off the bye, doesn't have that number at its disposal and say, oh, you haven't allowed a touchdown rushing and you're the first team in 12 years not to do it through 7 games. We'll take care of that. And then they rush for about 6 touchdowns. But it's a reality with this Nebraska defense, and I think it's part of their identity too. We talked to John Bullock and Ty Robinson Tuesday during Nebraska's media availability, and the question was posed to both of these guys about red zone defense and, in particular, the red zone defense against the run. And the responses were similar. And it was kind of the mentality, I think, that we heard from Nebraska when the question was asked about what they said to each other when Rutgers blocked the punt and returned it to the 2-yard line. Like, how do you approach that situation as a defense when you walk on the field and it's 1st and goal at the 2? Like, thanks for the field position. But They just said they're not getting in. They're not getting in. We're not overthinking it. It's plain and simple. We're going to stop them. And in that case, they did. Often you're not going to live up to that, but that's where their standard is.
There's been, I mean, how many times has that happened now in 18 games Matt Rule has been in Nebraska? Like the defense is put in a completely horrible spot, and then like you're just saying you're resigned to giving up at least a field goal, probably a touchdown. Nobody would be ashamed of you if you gave up a touchdown because they're starting basically with 1st and goal. And Nebraska comes away with giving away no points somehow. That's happened at least 2 or 3 times, like since Rule's been here.
Yeah, that and the goal line stand have kind of become a hallmark or a signature of this defense. It's not going to happen every game, but they've been stout in those short yardage situations this year. They were against Colorado, and obviously against Rutgers. That was a decisive moment in the game. You think back to last year when Nebraska used had the turning point in its season, if there is a turning point in a 5-7 season, but there kind of was that year coming off the Michigan game and had the big goal line stand against Illinois, which was key in that victory on the road. I think it's something about what Tony White and his coaches, what they instill in this defense, and they're more in their mindset than anything else. Like we're not out here to give an inch, and if it's 1st and goal at the 2, then that's fine. And that's going to be a needed way of thinking against Indiana, because they're going to find themselves in situations where Indiana has been having its way and just has been rolling over teams in moments where it seems like it should favor the offense. It does. And that's Nebraska. I think that's a huge key in this game is winning those moments that look like they favor the home team.
Yep. They're going to get some yards. That's for sure. Nebraska's going to keep them out of the end zone and keep points off the board. The other thing we wanted to bring up here in this segment as an underlook storyline. Let's go ahead and grab the fishing reels and reel Dylan Raiola back in here. Let's talk about him. We have a whole. We'll talk about Dylan more, sort of off the beaten path in the second segment of this show. Obviously, a lot. We talk about his statistical output through 6 games and how he's on pace for all these things, and he's doing a great job quarterbacking so far. But I think, and Mitch, I think you would agree that his calm and poise and leadership is really, like, we're starting to see that blossom a little bit as we get to the halfway point of the season, and to the point now where I feel like it's kind of his team. It's just from a leadership perspective and a voice perspective. I don't think that could be understated in the second half. That hasn't happened around Nebraska in a long time. A quarterback that people trust, and they trust as a voice in the leadership space as well. I don't feel like it's talked about enough for Nebraska's success in the final 6 games.
Yeah, we kind of shoved it under the rug a little bit. Like, we talked about Dylan plenty all through the months leading up to the season, and then in the first 5 games of the year, he didn't have a bad game. It was all about him. Take out that overtime against Illinois, which was a total offensive breakdown situation. And he was on point with just about everything that he did. And then against Rutgers, he goes out and throws a real interception, and he has a bad second half. It's as simple as that. Nebraska's best offensive play of the second half, or best gain of the second half, was Brian Buschini's fake punt. It just wasn't clicking between Dylan and his receivers in those 2 quarters. And that's fine. That happens. It was windy, whatever. Like, it's football. But I think we've kind of, moved back a little bit from the hype, and I don't know that we should. He's still a true freshman. He's still the top passer among all true freshmen in the country. I went through the NCAA stats on Monday to make sure that there's about 7 or 8 true freshmen that have thrown for, or I'm sorry, 7 or 8 freshmen who have thrown for more than 1,000 yards. And Dylan and Danny O'Neal are the only 2 who are true freshmen. Dylan's up around close to 1,400 yards, so he's in the lead. Like, I wrote Wednesday on The Athletic about his maturity, like some of the rare qualities that Raiola has that he's showing this year that we don't necessarily see in those 60 minutes on Saturday. You see the result of them, but what he does behind the scenes, the kind of respect that he's gained with his offensive and defensive teammates, it's just not normal for a freshman, especially when there's 19 seniors on that team.
He totally wins it before the game is played. And a lot of the stuff that he does that puts him in position for success inside an individual play, he makes that happen before the snap, and he makes that happen before he throws the football. So I think that tracks with what he's done this year for sure.
And he makes it happen during the week. You heard him talk on Tuesday about the importance of earning the right to be able to play well at the end of the week with the way that you practice on Tuesday and Wednesday. It sounds like something straight out of Matt Rule's the book that's in his head. Like, Matt Rule talks a lot about books. Someday he's going to retire and write a book about a lot of this stuff, and that sounds like one that's right there. Like, you have to earn the right to play well before you can actually go out and do it. And Dylan, he's following along.
Yeah, there's some real synergy there, like that. When your quarterback sounds like your coach, I think that's probably a good thing for your program. All right, another thing about Dylan, he gets to work early. He gets to the football facility early anyway. What happened when he got there? Maybe a little too early over the bye week. We'll discuss that when we come back on the Locked On Nebraska podcast.
All right, Mitch Sherman here to take a break and tell you about Game Time, because it is the second half of this college football season. It's here. We have arrived at week 8. If you haven't noticed, every night there's great baseball on TV. The pennant, well, I don't know about great, but it's baseball. It's playoff baseball. The pennant races are over. We are about to embark on the quest to the World Series. 4 teams left. If you've got a game that you want to see in person, maybe you're in LA, maybe you're in New York, maybe you're in Cleveland, Game Time will make that experience much easier because it is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. Prices on the Game Time app, even in the playoffs, go down the closer you get to first pitch. Whatever it is that you're doing this fall, if you want to go to a concert, a baseball game, a college football game, a basketball game, if it's a hot ticket, it's there on Game Time. You can see flash deals from your seat. You can customize your spot in the stadium. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app today. Game Time, last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, back with you for the second segment on this Wednesday of the Locked On Nebraska podcast ahead of the Huskers at Indiana on Saturday, 11 a.m. Central Time, Fox, Big Noon, the TV show. Gus and Joel will be there. I will be there, hopefully, after my travels. I have to go through Denver in traveling on Friday. What can you? That never taken that route before. But Southwest had the best offerings for this trip when I booked it, and you can't go through Midway to get to Indianapolis on Southwest. You can go through Dallas. You can go through Denver. Nope, no flights. There are no flights. I double-checked this. No direct flights from Midway to Indy. I guess it's like flying from Omaha to Kansas City. They just don't see the benefit of that.
Huh. That's stupid. And I'm a big point to if I see that, if I'm booking travel and I see that I have to go west to eventually go east,
I don't like it. I hate it.
I honestly, I just don't do it. I can't can't rationalize it in my head. I can't go back an hour to go forward 2 hours. That doesn't make sense to me. But if it's the path of least resistance here, it seems like more power to you.
It must have been something like Delta through Minneapolis, which is what I've usually done to get to Indy, or even O'Hare, because you can go on American or United. They must have just been so much more formidable with the price. Even that, I don't know. I mean, I'm not paying for it, but I'm a good soldier in this situation.
Good for you.
You would hate to somehow have a weather problem and get stranded in Denver on the way to Indy. I mean, if you're stranded in Omaha, you can at least get in the car on a last minute,
Yeah.
Hail Mary and make the drive. Not from Denver. So let's hope that I'm there on Saturday. Before we get to Saturday, we're going to answer some mailbag questions this week. So send those in to the LockedOnNEB@gmail account. I'll check that. I haven't checked it in about a week, so it might be full of all kinds of questions. We'll get to those before the end of the week. You can reply in the YouTube comments and give us a question there. That would be great. You can tweet at us if you'd like, at Connor Happer, at Mitch Sherman. We'll get to some questions if they're asked that route. We'll also have our weekly predictions and a recap of our week 7 performances and making predictions on the Friday show. So, Connor, something I want to get to. On Monday, we heard from Matt Rule, and in answering a question about Dylan Raiola, he said that the freshman QB woke him up in his office on that morning. Rule came in early to the office, he said, around 4:30 because he couldn't sleep, ranked team on the schedule that week. And then he fell asleep while watching film. And the studious young QB knocked on the door and entered the room a short time later. So, of course, had to ask Dylan about this moment when he came to the stage on Tuesday. And here's what he had to say.
Coach Rule said you woke him up in his office last week by knocking on the door. What time do you have to get to the facility to do that?
Oh, he slept here, so he probably slept in a little more than he wanted to, but somewhere around I don't even remember. I walk in here and just walk in. I don't look at the clocks. I almost hit his head because he slept by the door, and I knocked, and I opened the door, and I hit something, and he was on the ground. So I was like, oh, I just knocked his head.
What can you unpack this for me? I'm struggling with this.
So the first question that we obviously wondered out loud about yesterday on the show was when we heard about this encounter was, did Matt Rule sleep at the office? And it turns out, yes, that is the case.
He said he did.
Well, yeah. So either he got there at 2:00 in the morning, or he just slept there entirely.
Dylan thinks he slept at the office.
Yeah, different things from different sides here, and apparently Rule,
but Matt would know.
He doesn't have he doesn't have a cot or something like that or a couch. He's got to have a couch in there.
It's a big office.
Yeah, and instead he just decided to sleep by the door to where Dylan Raiola came in and knocked his head. And that's out of a movie. I'm not sure about this.
Something's off here, and not in a sinister way.
No, we're gonna do a full investigative report on this. We need to.
Is there something I can FOIA about this? Security camera footage.
Great use of resources. Good idea.
Yeah, so I would say that Dylan probably knocked the door into something else. He didn't seem to think that he knocked it into his coach's head. But why was Rule was on the floor? What? Maybe that's where he likes to watch film, on the floor.
Yeah, I guess so. That's the only thing. I'm not sure. Like I said, he's got a couch. There's no way he's got a couch in there.
He had a couch in his old office, and I haven't seen the new office since they moved. They moved next door to the big Osborne complex. I'm guessing he got a bigger office than what he had previously at Memorial Stadium, because it's a huge building that's 315,000 square feet. So you'd give your $8 million coach a pretty good spot to work in that building. But hey, he's minimizing space. I don't know, sleeping by the door, on the floor, watching film at 5 a.m, whatever. We'll just keep on believing that's what happened.
Maybe it's a case where blankets were in short supply or something like that. So, if you've ever been in a situation where the blankets are in short supply, maybe you have to grab anything you can just to cover up if you're on the floor. And so maybe if that case it's the cushions from the couch or something like that. I don't know. We'll have to really, I'm very curious about how this went. Maybe we could do a reenactment. or something like that. I'm
Um,
not sure. Yeah, I've got a lot of questions left still though.
hey, you know what else happened this week? We're going way off the rails. Did you hear about the squirrel in Lincoln and what happened there?
What's squirrel in Lincoln?
So there's this. You should probably talk about this for a couple hours on your show today. So there was a squirrel that took out the power in a portion of Lincoln on Tuesday morning. It got caught up in some power lines apparently outside of near city campus,
Oh no.
and for a period of time, like 3 or 4 thousand people were without power, and Memorial Stadium went dark. Like you couldn't get into the doors of the Hawks Championship Center because
Oh
all of
my
the electric
God.
key cards were not working.
I'm reading the story now. So I assume that poor squirrel is no longer with us.
Yeah, you've seen the scene in Christmas Vacation. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah, yes.
Yeah, under the tree. It might have been uglier than that with this squirrel.
Yeah, poor guy. Poor guy. Didn't know what he was getting into. Wow. Look, I did not hear about this. Only in Lincoln, man. I don't. So I'm sure you've noticed this before, and it's a thing. It's been a thing on campus for many, many years. When you walk on the campus of the University of Nebraska, the squirrels are not scared of you. They don't care at all. That you could walk up right to them. Hell, you could probably pet them if you wanted to. They don't care. It doesn't bother them whatsoever. So these
I
squirrels
actually saw that happen. I actually saw that happen this summer on vacation in San Diego. That the squirrels were so tame and so used to being around people that at the beach, even though there's signs all over the place, do not feed the squirrels. It's not good for them. People bring bags of food and feed the squirrels and sit there, and the squirrels will get on your lap. So perhaps this is where UNL is headed.
I think so. We have to do our best to protect this group. So okay. I don't know where we thought that segment was going to go, but I don't think we thought it was going to end up there. There's still a little meat on the bone for Tony White. We could get to that. Marcus
Get to that after the break. Yeah.
Spoke yesterday as well. Remember, please, to like and subscribe to the show, whether it's on YouTube or the podcast listening platforms. Helps it out. Leave a comment in the YouTube section as well. We'll get to some of those in our mailbag show tomorrow. We'll be back after this. All right. A quick note from the FanDuel Sportsbook. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So if you get the hunch in the middle of a game, you can go check out the latest live stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page right there where you place your bets. It's all there for you. It's convenient. Head to the FanDuel Sportsbook. You're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Think about that. $5 bet, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You don't even have to win it. It's guaranteed. It's coming your way. So that's a lot of wiggle room to work with if you're new on the FanDuel Sportsbook. Head to FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right. Connor Hepper, Mitch Sherman back with you. Final segment of the Locked On Nebraska podcast for a Wednesday. Tony White, we talked about the defense a little bit at the beginning of the show. He spoke in Lincoln on Tuesday. I do think there's some of when I hear Tony White talk about how like people just ask him how good the defense is, right? Because what other, there's no other topic. Like how have you got there, right? He and I think this coaching staff is they're a little superstitious. They're like, stop telling us how good we are because we don't want to like blow it. It's like when
Tony's at the top of that list. I'd say.
It's like when you get on hole 7, in golf and you're like, hey, I think I'm like I think I'm even par right now. I'm playing pretty well. And then all of a sudden, you get to the clubhouse at 10 and you're like 5 over. So that's basically, I think, what he's trying to rail against at the moment. But no doubt about it, his defense has been awesome. And he was really good talking about it yesterday.
Yeah, the pass defense came up. And look, you're going to play Indiana. You're going to get asked about the pass defense, and you're going to get asked about the rush defense because Indiana is one of the few teams in the country that statistically, at least, is very good at both. Now, if I was going to say which one of those aspects of the Indiana attack is more of a like they're doing it with mirrors, I would go. I think their rush offense is perhaps suspect. We'll find out. And
I
I
think the
think
running backs are pretty good just watching them.
okay.
But it's pretty boomer bust. So
I think the passing attack with Rourke is legit.
Yeah.
That's just
their wide receivers are always
outsider
good.
view. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. I've like they have good wide receivers, and I would agree with you that if I'm thinking one of the two sides is more real than the other, it's probably the pass game. But I just don't like, it's just so hard to tell. I don't like they're 6-0. Statistically, they look like, I mean, it's incredible what they've done so far this year. There's a reason why people think that, they're gonna continue this into the second half of the season. But gosh, I just don't know. Like, you have to pick out weird areas from the last two games where they played Northwestern and Maryland, and those teams are at the very bottom of the Big Ten. And so you just don't know. Like, I'm really, really curious. I do think their quarterback is good. They always have good wide receivers. I think they have good running backs. It's just, when it gets stressed, what will happen?
Yeah, and I think Nebraska's coaches, to bring this back to what we heard in Lincoln on Tuesday, kind of feel the same way. They watch the tape, and I'm sure they watch a little bit of James Madison tape. He had extra time over the bye week. Indiana was probably not one of the teams in the offseason that Nebraska spent a great deal of time studying. It's hard to do it. You couldn't look at Indiana personnel at Indiana. You could look at a little James Madison, but I just don't think that's at the top of the list as the seventh game of the year coming off a bye. So I think a lot of what Nebraska has seen here from a film study perspective over the past week and a half is entirely, this is their first look. This is what all they know about Indiana. And I think they're probably scratching their heads a little bit and going, hey, are they this good? Because if they're this good, then whoa. But you have to consider the competition. So Tony sounded on Tuesday like a defensive coordinator whose mind was full of a lot of stuff, and he was kind of all business, and he was focused on the task at hand. So we'll see what he comes up with. It's one of those games where, Nebraska's won a couple this year. I think the last two you can look at as games that were, especially from a Nebraska defense versus the Purdue offense and Rutgers offense, where it's a check in the column for the coaching side of what Nebraska has done. Sometimes there is no check. Sometimes it's a stalemate. Oftentimes it's a stalemate, and the game is won entirely with what happens on the field. But you can get an advantage, and Tony is one of the best at what he does, and is of course always working for that.
Quickly, offensively, from Marcus Satterfield, what were some of the bullet points that because we're doing this thing right now where we're looking back through 6 games, but we're also looking ahead to Indiana. So there's a little bit of both that's in there. He highlighted a couple things, including, extending drives, getting better on third down. What'd you take from Satterfield yesterday?
Yeah, the third down thing for me was interesting. So Nebraska's sitting at 45th in the country, respectable, 43.6% on third downs this year. It did well against Rutgers, not so much against Purdue. Didn't really need to do well on third downs in the second half against Purdue.
I think it was 2 of 14 against Purdue. I mean, it was really ugly, really ugly.
Well, it was really ugly in the first half, and then in the second half, they were moving the chains and scoring on second down.
Yep.
And they had one third down attempt in the second half against Purdue, and it was a touchdown pass to Jamal Banks. Last year, this number for Nebraska was at 37.9%. So it's up more than 5 percentage points over its production from a year ago. You'd think, all right, that's pretty good. Satterfield says we've got to be way better on third down. So their mindset is closer to 50%. And they, you strive, you want to be over 50%, but you're not going to do that week in and week out. So that caught my eye that they've identified third downs, which have been okay. Or a little better than okay this year for Nebraska overall, as a point where they feel like they can get a lot better.
Well, so much of your success on third down, whether it's as an offense or as a defense, is what you do on first and second downs, right? So I think for Nebraska, it's trying to get that thing a little bit closer to that yellow invisible line on third down on offense, and for deep, like, I think for this game, and we'll get into the ins and outs of Nebraska Indiana over the next 2 shows here, but like, getting off the field on third down defense is going to be like probably the star thing for me. Star stat. Like, you can't let them continue to extend drives on you. Nebraska wants to possess the football. And I think that'll be one of the key ones if they can get off the field And Indiana has been, once again, another stat area where they've just been incredible so far this year.
I'm looking through the notes here, and I didn't find the right page. I believe Indiana's over 50% for the year.
They are 51.
Yeah. That's really good. And maybe that's why Marcus Satterfield looks at where Nebraska's at 43.6 and says, we've got to be way better at third down. Like, we're playing a team who does it really well. So if you're talking specifically about this game, you want to match Indiana in what it does on third down. All right. Last thing from Satterfield before we wrap up this show. I asked him on Tuesday about playing with a lead and what Nebraska's mentality is in playing with a lead. And we've heard some from Matt Rule after games about this when Nebraska's had a 2-touchdown lead like it did at halftime against Rutgers, or a 4-touchdown lead at halftime like it did against Colorado. And then the second halves have just looked disjointed from an offensive point of view, or just plain bad in the Rutgers game. So I was curious about Satterfield and like, what directive are you getting from the head coach? Is this more of the NFL style where you kind of take the air out of the ball in the second half? Like, you've got a freshman quarterback, coach him like a junior, but how are you approaching these parts of games where you have a lead? And he said, we're going to go until coach tells us to stop. And the number one thing they want to do is stay aggressive when they have a lead. So do you feel like it's looked like that?
I do not.
Yeah.
No, I don't. And I don't need it to look like that. Like, I don't like, if Nebraska is sitting on a 14-point lead, I don't want them to be, I don't want them to have the gas pedal all the way down. Like, I think it's about finding this happy medium. And the problem is, for Nebraska, they've been a little bit explosive on offense, both in the good or bad, both in the good and the bad, right? The boom or bust thing that we talked about with Indiana's run game a little bit earlier. So when it comes down to just extending drives, you want to keep the football on the ground and you want to run it, and you can't find a way to string together 3, 4, 5 plays in a row. They're going to get you 5 yards, right? So that's where, like, the fundamental stuff of the offense really comes to show. That's why, Nebraska has struggled when they've gotten to the opponent's red zones and green zones this year. They haven't put up enough points on the board, but they've done the things to get them there. They've gotten the yards to get them there. So I just think you're looking for that to flatten out a little bit, get a little bit more consistent across the board. There's always the conversation between aggressive and conservative and what you do when you have the lead in whatever situation. It's less of that for me. I think Nebraska needs to get better at the bare bones of like what they're doing on offense, like the real tenets of it.
Yeah. I'll just continue to say, get the tight ends more involved, because I think the tight ends are such an important part of those 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6 plays, which are key when you're trying to stay a little bit conservative, but also win the game and not give your opponent an opportunity to get back in. Long drives, and it's a struggle. It is a balancing act to get to that place with your offense. It's almost easier to play offense the way Nebraska intends to do it in the first half when it's trying to build a lead than it is to hold on to that lead. Yeah.
Way easier. For sure. That's why I'm curious. Here's another underrated storyline to this game. If it happens, like, if Nebraska finds itself down by 2 touchdowns at some point, like,
hasn't been there this year.
I want to see that. Like, I not that I want to see that, but I kind of want to see that. You know what I mean?
That's where you just air it out. That's where you just completely take the restrictions off of everything that Raiola is doing, and you say, okay, now go be this guy who's trying to throw for 350 or 400 a game. Yeah. It would be interesting to see what comes of that. They do have I think this is a team that has the offense to be able to come from behind, where it absolutely was not a year ago, but we've not seen Nebraska in that position.
Agreed. Yeah, we haven't seen it yet. All right, that's it for us today on a Wednesday. Thursday, Friday shows normal. We'll do mailbags, we'll do picks, keys, and all of those things, and we'll hear from Matt Rule one more time before they hit the road on Friday. If you enjoyed this, first of all, thank you for listening, making this your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On College Football podcast. Spencer McLaughlin's got you covered over there. Everything that's happened up to this moment and previewing the weekend. You can find a link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to search. That's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.